A round of applause. Hi, everyone. All right. So as you know, this conference this year aims to facilitate conversations on creating a sustainable academia for the early career researchers working there, including doctoral students. And so throughout this morning we talked a lot about social sustainability in academia, and now it's time to discuss environmental sustainability. Okay, so we're going to introduce the speakers today. So we have Hannah Lundgren, John Payne, correct me if I pronounce wrong, Kali Gerhardt, and Svetlana Krakowska. Hi, welcome. So I'm going to introduce briefly each one of you, and after that you can introduce yourselves. So Hannah Lundgren is a PhD candidate in political science at Uppsala University. And as part of her dissertation, she conducts a qualitative interview study with researchers at different Swedish universities to investigate how they relate to flying and emissions within academia. And the purpose of the study is to understand why academics as a group seem reluctant to reduce their own emissions, but also to explore deeper the differences in views and experiences between different academics. And then we have John Payne, who's head of the Department for Environment at Formas, which is the Swedish Research Council for Sustainable Development. John has been a part of the management team there since 2018 and has extensive experience of research funding, research and innovation policy in the environmental field. And John has also worked previously at the Swedish Research Council and the Swedish National Union of Students, where he was policy officer for production debates. And we also have Karin Gerhardt, a scientist that's let's see if I can manage to say in Swedish. SLU, which in English would be
Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences.
okay.
Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, just outside Uppsala.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just I have the name in Swedish, and Swedish is unfortunately awful. So thank you for saying it in English. So a scientist within biodiversity and sustainable food production. And you teach on topics related to the climate and biodiversity crisis. And you started a climate working group at SLU and is involved in the public debate on climate change and the need for action. And our fourth speaker is Svetlana Krakowska, who is the head of the Applied Climatology Laboratory at the Ukrainian Meteorological Institute, and who is also an expert at the Optima project on open science at the National Antarctic Scientific Center. And at the same time, she's also the vice focal point in Ukraine of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Yes, welcome, all of you. Okay, so now we can start with should we? Yeah, we can follow the order here. Do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, okay. So as mentioned, I'm Hannah. I'm a PhD student in political science here at Uppsala University. I'm at two departments. So I'm at the Institute for Housing and Urban Research, the IDF, and the Department of Political Science. And I'm here in this panel because I am engaged in the topic of an environmentally sustainable academia in two different ways. So first of all, I work sort of more practically, I guess, with the topic at my two different departments. And I recently I've been responsible for mapping the carbon emissions of my two departments. And perhaps I can talk more about this later, but briefly, Uppsala University commissioned a report a couple of years ago of the total carbon emissions of the university, including how emissions are distributed between different parts of the organization. And that report showed that in 1 year, this was 2019, the calculation was based on 2019 before the pandemic then. So in that year, 2019, the university emitted 50,500 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents, and that equals to about like 8.1 ton per full year employee. It is difficult to make sense of these numbers, I know, but that is a lot, you could say. And the largest proportion came from travels, and in particular flying, and the second largest came from buildings and like the facilities. And then at one of my departments and then the other, we decided to replicate this analysis at the departmental level to see like how much, what part of this does our departments contribute to, and how does the distribution look like at our department for my two different departments. And I was then responsible for these calculations. So we had a somewhat similar result at both places, where travels and then flying was the biggest proportion. But the distribution was somewhat different because travels was not, at the whole university, travels was cost about 1/3 of the total emissions, but at my department then, travels constituted 2/3 of the proportion. For us then, travels and then flying was an even bigger source of emissions. And we are a social science department, so that might be one of the reasons we don't use like lab materials and chemicals and machines and things like that. So that probably matters. So that is one part. And then second of all, and in parallel to this work that I've done at the departments, I've also become more and more interested in how the topic of like the environmental impact of universities is discussed and perceived among academics. Because part of the work at the departments has of course been to like communicate the results and discuss what can we do to reduce our emissions. And this topic isn't uncontroversial among academics. And there is maybe some sort of like inertia to change in practice and like to change our practice basically. And I also think it's interesting because for us then flying is one of the main, and for our departments, it was the main source of emissions. Flying and mobility, like the goal to reduce flying and mobility tends to clash with many other goals and dimensions at the university. For example, internationalization or academic freedom and things like that. So it is a pretty interesting topic actually. So now I also study this as part of my dissertation. And as you mentioned, I do interviews with social scientists at several different universities in Sweden. To sort of understand how we or they experience the demands of being mobile and also the different possibilities to maybe reduce one's emissions from flying. And I am sort of in the middle of the study or reaching the end of my interview. So I haven't worked with the material quite yet. I don't have any like conclusive results, but I can share some preliminary thoughts later if you want. Oh, and another thing that I just want to mention is that I try to sort of capture the experiences of different groups of researchers. Because we are, of course, not one homogeneous, coherent group, but we have very different positions, like, for example, junior versus senior scholars, people with small children and things like that. So I'm interested in how we have different positions within academia and different possibilities to impact our traveling behavior. Yeah, so that is why I'm here basically. And I am really excited to talk more. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. We have John.
Thank you so much, and nice to be here with all of you. Like we said, my name is Jonathan Payne. I'm from Formas, which is one of the main research and innovation funders here in Sweden. We work on sustainable development. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit to remind us all why we're talking about this topic. I'm sure most of you or all of you know this already, but I think it's important to remind ourselves why this is a current topic. And the UN and many other bodies, they have pointed out that we are now living in a planetary triple crisis. We have climate change, which you all know about. It looks like we're not on track to meet the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement. It's very serious for us. We also have biodiversity loss. We run the risk of losing approximately 1 million species from the planet. This will have large effects on our food supply, on where we can live, on the climate itself. It will have very serious consequences for society. And we also have the third crisis, which is the increasing amount of pollution and waste that we have, which causes millions of early deaths in the world every year. This is obviously a very serious environmental problem, but I also want to make the point that the green transition, it's not actually a green transition. It's not just about the environment. These crises, they also lead to geopolitical consequences, they lead to a lack of social cohesion in countries, they lead to economic crisis. So it's not just an environmental issue, it's also a socioeconomic issue that we're dealing with. And the cost of inaction is immense. And then, of course, this means that we can't afford to have business as usual. No sector can continue with business as usual. And I think sometimes we forget in academia that that applies to us as well. If we're talking about societal transformation, if we're talking about changing our economies or societies to green economies and societies, then we also need to remind ourselves that academia is part of society. Every sector, every country has to achieve net zero emissions. So we have to get down to this, and that applies even to academia. And we really need to practice what we preach. I usually say to my staff to provoke them that it's misconduct if we don't practice what we preach. When we have access to the research we do, when we say, listen to the research, follow the facts, follow the research, listen to what the IPCC says, we really need to practice what we preach and do as we follow. And I think it's particularly important for all sectors of academia to do this. And obviously, academia has a very important role to play in actually understanding these societal challenges, in bringing about innovative solutions to these societal challenges, to engaging in outreach and education and other kinds of activities to talk about these issues, and also to be a critical and democratic institution when we're dealing with these crises. But we also need to work with ourselves and to rethink how we can work as academia in the future. And there are a couple of ingredients which I think are important for that. I think leadership is really important. We need the presidents of research institutes and universities and the heads of research councils like myself to take the lead on these issues. In my experience, universities can sometimes be quite conservative places. We like to talk about change in other places and other institutions, but we don't always like to deal with changing ourselves and how we work and how we're organized. And obviously, as I tried to point out in the beginning, it's not just about carbon dioxide emissions, it's about other issues as well. So we need to think, like Hannah was talking about, how we travel, how we meet as academics. We need to rethink how we do that. We also need to think a lot about land use. Universities, research institutes sit on quite large land banks. They own quite a lot of land in different parts of the world. We need to work actively on that. We need to think about the investments and the capital that our institutions sit on and what they do. And we also need to think about things like resource efficiency, how we use our buildings, how we use energy, how we deal with waste and chemicals that our work creates. And we also need to maybe reimagine the academic career, because I guess as early career researchers and doctoral students, you're subjected to a lot of myths and a lot of truths about how to do an academic career, about how much internationalization is required, about how much mobility is required, about how many times a year should be at different conferences. And I think we also need to rethink the message that we give to people about what an academic career looks like. And I think that's something that would also promote social and economic inclusivity, to mean that there are different ways of doing an academic career. And that's a dialogue that a lot of us need to be active in and talk about how this will look in the future, which I hope some of my colleagues here can talk about. And finally, I'd also like to say I usually say we need more carrots than sticks. When you deal with these kind of issues, it's quite easy to start thinking about what we need to regulate and how we can restrict how researchers fly or how they use buildings and stuff. And I think we're still at the stage where it's more important to create incentives to make it easier to do the right thing, rather than forbidding certain things or putting a lot of requirements on already hard-working researchers. So I think that's something for us to think about. How do we create more incentives and make it easier to make the right choice? I guess we can go back to some of these issues.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, John. Ready?
Thank you very much. Yes, it has already been presented, so I don't need to go so much there. But I'm a scientist and have worked many years with biodiversity issues and sustainable food systems. And a couple of years ago, I went outside my own comfort zone. Being a scientist, just publishing papers and going to conferences saying this is bad, I think that wasn't enough. So we started an informal group at SLU with people who were concerned about that the academia didn't take the climate crisis and sustainability crisis with enough seriousness that is needed. And that last year, for example, just to highlight, we wrote a debate article just prior to the elections, and where we gathered 1,944 scientists who signed and asked the government to take more stronger actions. And I started that debate article, and it was really interesting because the process that happened were that 227 big companies answered, did the same debate, and also artists. And so we are being more and more groups in the society that react. And what we also have been doing is writing a lot of articles and repliques. What does that ever, how do you say that? Replies anyway, in the research newspaper Curie about should scientists be activists or not, or in what way should we engage outside academia? And there are many different ways of doing that, and I can come back to that also later. But I think one thing that is really important is because you sometimes feel alone. I know that you do that as a PhD student or as a scientist, but it's really, really good to try to work together, because even if you want to have the leadership from the university, what are they called? The vice chancellor and so on, maybe they don't take the lead. So we are others within the university that needs to act. And I want to go back to saying what already you said, that we have the knowledge, we have the science, and we have for over 30 years said that we are going into climate crisis and into biodiversity crisis. And nobody has reacted. This is something that we know, and it's getting worse and worse. And if you just a week ago, there was a paper published in Nature by Rockström et al. About the planetary boundaries. And he's saying, and this group is saying, that we are already crossing 7 out of 8 boundaries. And some are going to be trespassed. So the crisis is really, really there, and it's getting more. Even if the weather is nice today, it's not nice all over the world, and it will become. And I'm concerned as a person, I'm concerned as a mother, I'm concerned as a scientist. So I think that the university must act much stronger, because we, as Albert Einstein said, we have the privilege to know. And those who have the privilege to know have a duty to act. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Actually, I prepared a presentation, and I hope it will be possible to share my screen. Well, first of all, I'm really very happy to be in this panel and just to listen what you already said, because it's so much resonated with my thoughts as well. So I didn't know, what will be here, but so my presentation was prepared intuitively. So about myself, you already said. But where I work, and I work really for IPCC, and IPCC is really a big part of my life, more than 10 years. With this, hope it will work. Yeah, so I just wanted maybe to show some of the signals for those who are not maybe too much worried about. So for climatologists, it's usually to show thermometer, how we measure climate change. So it's usually speaking about global warming, but it's not only global warming, as you said already. What I want to show, it's one thermometer which was in May 2021, and you can see here current policies which goes up to 3.9, so it's the upper limit there. And then I have another one which is for November 2022. So it's updated. So it's just to give some impression that something, some positive feedback, because now the current policy is 3.4, so the upper limit. But we still indeed not on the track to 1.5. So we need much more effort. With this, I like these cartoons actually. Just wash your hands and everything will be fine. It will be not fine. We need our action actually. And the problem is that between those waves where the climate change is the biggest, we now have the war in Europe, which actually exacerbates everything. So it's very recent. It's, yesterday is this act of ecocide, this Kakhovka Dam, which we actually don't know all consequences up to now. And yeah, I cannot say that we were not prepared. In fact, because we have such terrorist state as neighbor, we were prepared in some way. But of course, it's like for the full-scale war. Again, so it was my calendar, and calendar for those who live in Kiev. So between those bombing and missiles every day, every night, so we were continue to walk because we understand that we should not stop. We want to win not only the war for our freedom, we want to win actually the war for better sustainable world without climate crisis. I started to do it just on the 24th actually of February, so a year ago I started to speak about these common rules, and I was speaking in different ways, so more than 100 I had interviews where I put this connection between fossil fuels and climate change as a finding of the law of Putin regime, Russian economy impact, and as fueling of the climate crisis impact. So I said that we unite, as we in Ukraine actually united against our enemy. The same, the world should unite in our efforts to combat climate change. And here I said that actually about this again, and I said that we need to build this climate resilient future. So climate resilient future. So it's about sustainability. I was in Davos invited together with Rostrom. Actually, we were on the same panel, and we were speaking about climate change, and that politicians should listen to science and be advised by scientists to make their decision, in fact. And after all, it was, I was really happy because it got up to, this Guardian, I guess it was about Scholz, Putin, Klitschko, and then climate scientists. So it was really on high level. And I was really happy that due to this bad situation, I had the opportunity to speak about climate crisis as well. So every my talk, I finish with such nice statement, which is about energy sustainability, and it was actually in Dallas. just when Europe was worried how Europe will go in the winter, will we survive without this Russian? So this is the way. So sustainable way. And due to this, actually, I was selected to this top nation people, top 10, and this story words for Ukraine. So now I'm really very famous, I guess, in the scientific community. I was, as all scientists, I guess, dreaming to be in nature, but I didn't know that I will be in such way. So, just maybe a bit about science, because we are speaking about this climate crisis and climate resilient way of living. So it's about 6 assessment, which was very recently actually approved on the session. And here you see the way. It's a bit foggy way, and where you want to go, in fact. So IPCC is clear. So the way forward is climate resilient development. The way will integrate with climate change with reduce emission, what you just were talking about. And if you give us benefits when you improve health, so it's indeed very good for sustainable development goals, of course. And with this, again, very now famous, this picture, how we consider to grow as a whole world, actually, and what we will have. And here we see the sustainable development goals again. Will we achieve them or not? And it depends on the way how we live, will we travel, and how we will change our life, actually. And here you see this, some shock events, actually. And this shock event is like the war. We have now the Russian invasion in Ukraine or some other war, actually, in the world. And it could be actually climate war as well. So it could be a war for climate resources. And sometimes I speak about this because Ukraine has excellent climate and excellent nature resources, in fact. So not because there is no some goals for the war, but this natural resources of Ukraine, it's like a background, in fact, for this. So just to show you very small example of sustainability for our planet, in fact. So this is the global temperature, which was for 2000 years. So the global temperature was busy, plus minus 0.2 degrees. And then very recently in this Anthropocene, we have a very quick actually rise of the temperature. So it's just to show this scale. And this last 4 decades were one by one warmer and warmer. So it's really emergency situation. And I believe you scientists, you can see actually here some cycles, some natural cycles, which is about 60 years. And here you see this one cycle, second cycle, and here should be the next cycle. And instead of going down from 2000, it goes up. So it means we now actually, so this natural cycle, they compensate a bit. So what will be after 2030? So we have very little time to react and to act. So what I want to say with this actual picture. And yeah, just to show you how unprecedented the situation we have with other, actually demonstration of the crisis we have. So this is the highest concentration of 2 million years. So if somebody will say you about climate change, okay, it's just natural, and it was always the same. Okay, 2 million years ago it was, but what was this? Humanity as we know. So and the same other numbers, and all these numbers we as scientists know, and we try to provide this information. It's already available. And here is that maybe now very famous about our different pathways and how we managed in this last 200 years, in fact. One just. So it's just 100 and a half, in fact. Sorry. So it's about when we born and how much heat, additional heat, you got in your body. and how it will feel for people or for children who just born. And this is different pathways with different emissions we emit. So we still, if we will still emit and to make this, impact on climate. So just it's our choice, and I really on the same page with you because I was scientist working with climate models, and I'm mother of 4 children, and I decided I need to go and to speak everybody for everyone. And actually I have I just forgot to show, I have special scarf with the same stripes. So I try to attract people everywhere where I go and to speak about it, because we need to unite everybody, literally everyone on the planet to beat this war, not only in Ukraine, but against climate crisis as well. So I guess, thank you.
Thank you all. And now I'm going to start with a question. I think that we all ask ourselves. So what measures are needed to reduce academia's environmental impact? And I mean, in these measures, which efforts actually make a difference and which ones are really greenwashing? So I don't know who wants to start. Yeah. So basically what can be done and what is really effective and what is also greenwashing. Yeah, Karin?
I actually think that Hannah has mentioned some of it already. It depends on what level we are talking about, because we can, at our university, we have a new policy when it comes to flying, because flying is one of the sort of key things that we in academia try to do a lot. And I think it's really important for PhD students and other, even if you want to go to conferences and so on, like if you want to go to conference, try to get it into Europe, try to take the train, for example, in our department, because, train tickets are more expensive than air tickets, and you don't always have that research funding for that. But our own department sponsors us to take the train instead, so we don't need to pay for that cost. So people are increasingly taking trains when they go to meetings and other issues when it comes to traveling, because I think that is one of the key things. But another thing is also to try to have an impact on our vice chancellor, on the university administration, because I think there is a good example here in Austria. Just a couple of months ago, all the university deans went out with all the university went out with a common press release to the government saying that you are doing too little. So they were really trying to put the pressure, and they were also defending activists. Today, if you're an activist, it's something that is seen as something bad in society, and we are actually shooting the messengers about these people who are protesting. They don't earn any money from it, but they are the ones that can risk to go to prison, even if they are doing something that is civilian, that is not not violence. They were also in Austria defending those activists, and they were standing behind them at the university level, actually. And I think that's kind of interesting. And my question is here, why aren't universities here in Sweden doing more in that kind of putting pressure? Because we all know that is also really, really important. So that's sort of because I think that can have an impact if universities are willing together to say, put a pressure on the government, put a pressure on the ones who are polluting and not on the messengers. Thank you.
Yeah, I can add some points. More concretely, I guess, as I mentioned, the Uppsala University mapping of the whole university showed that, travels and then in particular flying was the main source of emissions. But that buildings also was a really big part, and then in particular energy use. And then also the third largest for the whole university was purchase of goods. So like different types of chemicals and lab material and things like that, but also sort of purchases for the office and food and everything. So I think, traveling and the ways of traveling, I think that is one aspect that is, I mean, it's one of the biggest categories, but it's also something that we could actually have a direct effect on. I mean, we can directly impact that. So I think it's a good sort of way to start. But your question also was part of like, what is greenwashing? And I think that maybe we kind of need to do everything. We need to do a lot and target all these different parts, because we need such drastic measures, and we have ambitious goals. And in order to reach them, it's not enough only to focus on one part, but we have to do all of the different parts. So I want to echo what you said also, that I think that perhaps we need to, as you said, reimagine the academic career and reimagine sort of how we do things. Because when I talk to researchers, for example, in my interviews, I often hear from senior researchers that we should prioritize junior scholars and let them focus then on flying. But yeah, so that's the argument that it's more important for us junior researchers to fly and to network and everything. And first of all, research shows that it is, in fact, the senior researchers who travel the most. So there is sort of a discrepancy there. But second of all, I think that, you could argue that, okay, now it's younger people's turn to fly here and there and to emit a lot. But you could also, instead try to think of how can we as the new generation do things differently. That in a way that doesn't impact our environment that negatively. So starting sort of conversations of how we can do things differently. It's pretty vague, I know, but I wanted to add that as well.
Yeah, okay. Actually, maybe I could add very simple things as well. I mean, but the simple things actually save life. So it's very usual. It's reuse, recycle. So if we put it in the way we live, so first reduce. Do we need these things to buy? Do we need this to be happy? So it just teach children, because it's much easier to teach children and youth than senior. Do you need this stuff? Do you need this toy? Or you can just play a bit and just give up. So it's very easy. So another actually was advice I like, actually it's DiCaprio for students. So it was 3 advice. The first advice, it was about election. So elect people, they care about environment. So be active and just, ask what they're thinking about climate change, and then elect those you trust. And then you can actually make a difference when you buy something. So with your purse, with your money, actually, whom you pay for this some values, actually. So do you put money in, well, it's about greenwashing as well, but you need to dig deeper to make it. And the third actual advice was unite. So unite with those who already know better. So this NGOs or some other associations. So it's quite easy to make things different when you united with others. So it's very easy, but I guess we all want and love these easy solutions, but it's easy to remember.
Yeah, like Hannah said, I think transport, energy, and buildings are the biggest things to look at, but also that, I don't know if you can call it greenwashing, but I mean, you can build a new building and put solar panels on top of it, but the most energy smart building you build is the one you don't build. So I mean, about repurposing the infrastructures we have and reusing and recycling things we have at the university, I think that's the most important step to take. And also, I think, which several of us have alluded to as well, it's also about working with this at different levels of scale. So I mean, we need to work on the university-wide level where the management of the university really needs to take leadership, but we also need to work on things at the department level and see what's actually going to make a difference. There's no point in, I don't know, I'm not going to forbid Arctic researchers to fly to the Arctic. They need to go there to do the field studies. But I mean, it depends on the discipline you're in or in what you're working on, what's actually going to have the best benefit, and then also what I as a researcher can do as an individual. But I think there's a tendency, which I think Hannah was talking about, to push everything down onto the individual researcher, which I think isn't the best way forward. We need to work at the university level and at the departmental level on this as well.
Exactly. And another question that ties a bit to what had been said. So what would a sustainable academia imply for research and academic practices for the training and working condition of young, like early career researchers? Like, except because, I mean, of course, we mentioned flying, but then do you think that there are other things that maybe could be implemented early on, types of like how to be international, but differently? I think we mentioned that this morning. How can you be mobile, but maybe without having to be totally going to all the conferences abroad, etc. Yeah.
I mean, you can just, we had the pandemic a couple of years ago and we all became digital. And I think that is pretty easy way to go forward. And I've been to sort of digital conferences and also meeting new people. And it was kind of interesting, but it can work. And one example that I think is also really, really important is when you defend your thesis. I was in the committee of one thesis that was done during the pandemics. The opponent was in South Africa. The respondent was in Lund, and all the committee were in Helsinki, in Copenhagen, and me. And we were all sitting, very digitally, and we didn't have a large impact we didn't fly. It takes a long time as well. It takes you many days to go there and back. And particularly, maybe when you are a PhD student, you really want to meet your opponent, but you can think about when you selected an opponent. You don't need to select an opponent from New Zealand. You can select one from Germany or from Europe. So, I mean, there's a way of thinking here. And I think we learned a lot during the pandemics, and don't forget that, because digital things work pretty good actually nowadays. Thank you.
Yeah, John?
Sorry.
Yeah, I can completely agree on that. And also when we went from having all our peer review panels digitally, we've continued to have them digitally after the pandemic. Some people love them, some people hate them, but that was the case before as well. But we reduced our emissions by 95%. So it does happen. And also something we noticed, I think during the pandemic, there was also a democratization of some kinds of fora. We saw that people from the global south could participate digitally at a comparable level when maybe they haven't either had the resources or haven't got the visas to be able to participate in things in purpose. So there could also be a just aspect to actually moving things digitally. And also this idea of mobility, I think we really need to rethink. I mean, mobility for the sake of it, there's no point. When is mobility necessary? It might be better to, go to the US for 6 months and work in a lab there rather than go to 5 conferences a year, but to travel less, but to use those travel credits that you have more widely, I think is something we need to discuss. And I also think, I mean, these kind of societal challenges we're talking about, a lot of them require a different way of doing research. Often it requires engaging in interdisciplinary research. It requires maybe venturing into the science policy fields to, engage in the IPCC processes, for example, or to work with outreach or to write debate articles that are based on fact as well. And then I think that's also an important message for us to send to early career researchers, that there need to be supports in order to engage in these other things that aren't just producing papers or aren't just producing citations. We need to kind of reevaluate what an academic career is and send the message that in engaging in an expert panel like the IPCC or IPBES or one of these other panels, that is an incredibly important contribution to academia. And that also needs to be valued. When I look at grant applications, I need to value that as well. So I think that's another important step for us to take.
Yeah, I was thinking also of as I mentioned before, also the different positions that we have within academia, and that I think in previous research, sometimes on academic flying, as the topic is called, there is a tendency to see academia as sort of one coherent group. But we, especially maybe as junior scholars, know that it is not true. It is full of hierarchies and different differences in resources and things like that. So, I mean, I think that we probably also need to talk about this question that you just asked, like what does it imply for different groups of researchers and how should we think around that? Because I mean, the digital option I think is great often. But if we talk about, for example, choosing train instead of plane, there are some things that make it a bit more difficult, like money, for example. If it's more difficult, takes more time. As junior scholars, maybe you don't have the same resources, then you have a big pressure on you to sort of succeed somehow in your career. You need then maybe special incentives. You could have financial support, for example, from your university or something, which we have at one of my departments now. But I was also thinking of, for example, having small children at home. Maybe a train takes a longer time and it is you cannot be away for too long. I mean, I do think that those things do matter, and that is not an argument to say that we should fly instead. But if we, for example, imagine that we have to reduce our emissions drastically and we have sort of a small budget left, then we do need to talk about how to sort of prioritize and how to distribute that small piece that we have. And then these differences within academia, I think, then are important to emphasize also.
Yeah.
Okay, just maybe a few words because I was thinking about how it implied for research, and I'm thinking about our Antarctic actually research, which is really very fun. We have Antarctic station, and we were very happy to buy, from a British Antarctic survey ship. But in fact, it's it's almost 30 years old, and so much fuel use. So we need to prioritize which research we can do with it. It's a lot of money, it's a lot of impact again on, but at the same time, it's very valuable results from biological point of view, from different impact, and just taking into account that this Antarctic West Antarctic ice sheet is one of tipping points in our climate system. So we need this research as well. So again, of course, we have this budget, but we can actually somehow compensate. So in some other way, some nature-based solutions. So there are many actually solutions in IPCC provided in the report, especially in working group 2 report, which is on impact. So I just want to say that you should not think that we need to invent something. All solutions on the table. Just it's like menu. Just take what you can and do it. Nothing more.
Yeah, we have 5 minutes left. Maybe we can take 1 or 2 questions from you.
Hey, thanks for a really interesting session. I have a more basic question about like how Hannah has said about the lab equipments that we use every day. I'm a biochemist, and we use single-use plastic a lot. Of course, we do segregate them when we are throwing them away. Also, the domestic way, how we segregate in Sweden. Do you have any studies as to how well does that work towards the sustainability of the environment? Or is it working or not?
I don't know. Does anyone else know? No. Yeah, it's not really my expertise, but I guess it's good that you recycle. I don't know. I'm so sorry. I don't really know.
Yeah.
There was a question.
I cannot run with it.
Sorry.
I mean, I know in my institution they're trying to actually measure it. Because that's the thing we don't know. So what you can probably ask in your institution is like, if it's measured, and how can we measure it if it works the way it's working right now? Because it's difficult to propose solutions if we don't know where it's the flow. Let's say. But I know, like in the labs and in my lab, they're trying to figure out how to measure it, how much is being recycled and how much is recyclable that we are not recycling.
Hi, Vina Sartori, I'm presenting as the faculty institute here. I just wanted to thank you for your talks. Although we've heard some of this kind of information before, but it's really good to get it reminded every time. I have a kind of a naive question, and that is because you mentioned, I don't remember which of you, about government. How can we convince them to take it seriously and act or react faster? What do you think? Because I'm in my naive brain, I'm thinking, are they aliens? Because they are like us humans, they have families, they have future. Why do they ignore or not take it enough serious? I'd like to have your reflection on that.
Okay.
Well, I can actually answer it from my perspective as Ukrainian, actually. So I usually I do a lot of outreach in Ukraine as well, but only recently I was listened by government because Ukraine has so nice climatic conditions, and it's the same as in Russia. So they say, okay, climate change is for good. It's warm. It's less, less winter and something like this. So we need to find arguments which will be more personal for them. And this is why actually I do this my personal some stories as well. And we just don't need to think that government it's something different from us. In fact, I believe that at least in Sweden or in some other world, you elect this person. So when you elect, you have some choice. So make this choice based on some, dig into what they want to go to and ask, and then elect those who will listen for your arguments. So this was my way, I would say, so just can provide my perspective. And I literally talk to everybody. I mean, your government will listen for you. Okay, I can provide another. So we had in our parliament we had a meeting for climate change. It was in 2018, first time, and there was some statistics. So one reporter said, this year we have twice more people who care about climate. I was wow, and they're 15%. I was just wow. And then I was thinking, okay, 1 year, twice more. So next year, twice more. So in 2 years, we will have more than half people who support this idea. And exactly in 2020, we start to speak on governmental level much more seriously. So speak to people, try to convince everybody, and government will not ignore.
And then Italian.
Yeah, quickly. I mean, I think about politics and research, they work on different logics and most of different time scales. Politicians tend to think one election cycle at a time, and it's quite difficult to understand complexity, or they understand complexity, but it's difficult to relate to complexity on those kind of time scales, which is something research is actually quite good at, about understanding complex systems and describing complex systems and navigating those. And I think that's maybe something important, which Svetlana is talking about, to actually, we need to equip our researchers as well. I think that should be an important part of the research education, to actually equip them in different tools for engaging in science policy interactions, or how to communicate, to use storytelling or other kinds of examples in order to reach out in these things. So I think it's an important tool going forward. And I think, which Karen was talking about earlier, it's important as well not to allow research and activism to be confused, or to to work on climate issues shouldn't be a political question. But we have a lot of disinformation at these times, which means that climate is seen as a political question. And I think it's important to make sure that our academic institutions are robust and resilient, and that we can stand up for them as important sources of facts and knowledge during these times.
Yeah, very shortly, since you said a lot of what I was thinking, which is really nice. And thank you. I just also want to say that in this, if we want to have a just transition, there are winners and losers here, and the losers are fighting because they are losing money, you know, and there's so much economy in this, and we shouldn't forget that. So the political game is not only by being re-elected, but you also have sort of stakes there. So it's really quite difficult, actually. And I think now the political temperature in Sweden is quite infected on the climate issue, which it's a fact. I mean, water boils at 100%, 100 degrees, and climate change is caused by humans. That is facts, but they are being turned into political issues and disinformation and so on. And I think that's a not really good way to go. So we should continue pressing, I think, putting a pressure from academia. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for a very interesting talk. Yeah.